Good morning, Watershed. Happy 15 years. Happy birthday. Happy anniversary. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning, Scott.
It's so good to be with you guys. We are 15 years into this. We can't believe it. We stood up at Actors Theater 15 years ago and had no idea what we were going to expect today.
No, we did not. And I'm not sure we know what to expect today either.
No, right, right.
So, go, please. You
All right.
first.
So if you are in front of your computer and you're throughout the city of Charlotte or around the country, whatever it is, maybe jump in, let us know where you're from. Also, like we said earlier, if you have a moment and you want to reach out to your friends and family, maybe you know some folks that have been a part of Watershed over the years that no longer are in Charlotte or no longer part of Watershed, but you want to invite them into this morning. Please let them know that this is happening, and most of this morning what's going to happen is not so much Matt and myself, but you're going to be hearing from our people. You're going to be hearing from your friends and people that you love around here. So really love to have you share what's going to be happening in the next hour or so, and look forward to the moments ahead. So there's been so much going on, and usually we get the opportunity to bump into you in the hallway here or grab coffee or lunch and get to catch up at a more sort of just chilled out, relaxed level and get to hear about what's going on in your lives. So we aren't going to really be able to do that so much hearing from you guys this morning, but I want to ask Matt, for you, man, what's going on these days for you?
That list is long and distinguished. Probably the coolest thing that's happened to our family over the last couple of months. First of all, we've had 6 adults living in our house. We have a friend of one of our kids that's been staying with us over the last 6 months of COVID. But a friend of ours gifted us a spot. He has like a little cabin up in the woods. And he said, "Why don't you and Donna get away?" And we said, "Well, we probably should take our kids." And so we invited our kids, and then our kids invited their friends. And so this is a photograph of us up in the mountains of Tennessee. This is at a goat petting farm, which was the non-negotiable for my wife. I'll go as long as goats are petted. There's counseling involved in that at some point.
Oh yeah.
And then just a real robust time of meals together and games and laughter, and I think there was some water sports in there somewhere. Yeah. So that's kind of what I've been up to.
Awesome.
Yeah. What about you?
Well, you guys were so gracious. 3 months or so ago, our house got pummeled by 3 large trees that just smashed our home, and you guys graciously talked about that a few months ago, and the outpouring of concern and prayers and meals and you guys just thinking about us has been just immense, and so thank you for that. I just kind of want to give you a report. Really, nothing's happened. So for 3 months, our house is still sitting there, and somewhere uptown in Charlotte there are documents that we're waiting to be signed. So if you're hearing this right now, would you please sign the document so we can get to work on our house? But nonetheless, our family's fine. We're in a house just down the street, and life is sort of resuming, I guess if it can under these circumstances, but it seems to be going relatively well.
Which is everyone's story, right?
Right, that's right.
Normal is different
That's
than
right.
it used to be.
That's right.
Yeah.
So here's this morning. We're looking forward to this together. We've got something really excited about happening that's going to be starting next week, and I want you to see this in a video form.
My name's Tracy, and I've been a part of Watershed since its inception, about 6 months prior to our first service. My husband and I, fiance at the time, were looking for a church, and a couple connections led us to Matt and Scott, and we were deeply looking for a community that all of our friends were welcome. We were over the fact that every time we brought our friends that they would not feel fully welcomed. And so that was our main goal, not looking for a perfect church, but a church that was willing to be mindful of their flaws and be open to working on those and open-minded enough regarding the landscape of our community. Our adoption was really because of Watershed. My husband and I had always considered adoption. We did grow our family initially with our biological daughter. And then we, like most parents, they get to the stage where they realize they have enough space in their heart to increase their family. And so we're like, well, we got to talk about adoption. We always talked about it. And we're business owners, and the economy is kind of crazy, and we knew it was a huge leap, and we didn't really know what to do, and we prayed about it. And before we left each other, Billy was like, listen, if it's supposed to happen, God will make it abundantly clear. And so me being a former Catholic, I walked away from that conversation and said, you got to drop it in my lap, right? Like, it's got to be a very big sign. 4 days later, we got a call from a friend who had periodically gone to Watershed. And she said she just found out that her daughter was pregnant and she wanted to find a family in Watershed to adopt her baby. And for the first time in my life, I felt like pushed, like physically pushed, and God like audibly saying, go there. And so we did, and our daughter is now 11. I can think of many, but because it's most recent is when my dad died. I was in Watershed's office 4 days later, maybe 3, surrounded with love and willingness to throw together this memorial service that I didn't know I had to do right away. And because I have been here so long and just the connections, and I felt like they were in it with me, they were grieving with me. And I just was so grateful for that family, essentially. I think that you always have to, if a church is open to say, we got it all figured out, then they're hiding something. From the beginning, you guys have always said, we don't know what we're doing, but we're gonna continue to figure it out, and we're gonna grow, and we're gonna be willing to say, I'm sorry, and we're gonna own our failures, and we're gonna just show up consistently and not stay stagnant. I mean, Watershed is everything that I hoped it would be that day that we met. Happy birthday, Watershed.
It's hard to know what to resonate with the most there.
Yeah.
I still don't know that we know what we're doing 15 years into
We definitely
this.
don't.
And Tracy and Billy, along with another family, the Sicklers, Rick and Amanda, they were here before Watershed was even a thing.
Yeah.
So hearing that story is really moving for me. Oliver, pull up that photograph that I found this past week. So I don't know if you've had a chance to see this, but this is you and I, the very first Sunday, sitting on stage together. And we're 15 years old as a church, and you look 15 in that picture.
Well, I didn't have any gray hair then.
And a lot of that gray hair is because of me. I'm
Right,
absolutely
that's right.
convinced
Absolutely.
of it. But this morning at 15 and hearing Tracy talk, like, what's surfacing for you?
I think that there's so much she said, and knowing Billy and Tracy and their story is so profound. But she didn't use this word, but the messiness of us, like the inability for us to think for 1 second that we've got this thing figured out. I think that's been so helpful for us, because what it does here is when other people show up and it's messy and they're in a small group or they're here on a Sunday, and when they're hearing of other people's imperfections and that their lives also are difficult and challenging, I think what it does is subconsciously, it brings down their guard. Yeah. It makes them vulnerable. And I don't even know if they're always aware of it. So then maybe when they're in their small group or in their block, they find themselves tearing up and saying, well, if they were sharing about their truth, I can share about mine. Yeah. Or maybe Cedric or Sean or Taryn or Awesome with a song said something on a Sunday that moved them and compelled them, and they found themselves crying in the back row and not knowing what was going on. It's because maybe the authenticity of the space allowed them to say, oh, I can fit in here and I can be here. So I think that the idea of messiness has been a profound awareness, at least for me, that has been Watershed since day one. Yeah. What about you?
Well, when I hear Tracy's story and having been close friends with she and Billy and their family all these years, and then I look at that picture of the two of us, like if you had told me that morning in 15 years Watershed would be all that we are now, I would not have had the choice but to opt out.
Yeah, right.
I didn't have categories for who we were going to become.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense that there's a stamina that has been developed, I know for me personally, but then when you think about someone like Tracy and her family, 15 years being a part of a community that, quote, doesn't really know what they're doing, like there's a bit of, we just keep turning back towards one another. We keep turning towards the thing that we're wrestling with. And I think very early on, there was a phrase, and it probably still exists here today, but after 15 years, stamina, but then also maybe Watershed is it's just a beautiful mess.
Yeah.
So we're yes, in just a moment. There's a little bit of a technical difficulty there, but at Watershed, liberation means living in the world as it actually is, but loving as if we believe a different world is possible. In living in the world as it is, we prioritize the truth lived on the margins because too often it's the powerful who tell stories of history. By loving as if we believe a different world is possible, we differentiate between the unjust and dehumanizing narratives that enslave and the people who hold to them, working to dismantle those narratives, convinced that liberation, first for the oppressed, is also liberation for the oppressor. And our action is therefore guided by the legacy and leadership of those on the margins who have been struggling for liberation for centuries, whose lament informs our humility, and whose joyful resistance in the face of injustice animates our hope. And I wanted to make sure that we named this morning this idea of liberation. For the longest time, it was justice, and I think more these days, liberation is the language. And for a large part of who we've been for the past 15 years, I think the idea of justice has been misinformed, in some instances wildly underinformed. For a while, or for the longest time, it was about writing checks. It was about trying to fix people, trying to get people to acquiesce to a system that often made it almost, if not literally, impossible for their lives to flourish. And so over the past few years, there's been like this shedding of scales from our eyes, almost like the way Paul describes his journey on the road to Damascus, something new becoming awake in us, an awareness of justice as solidarity with the marginalized. Solidarity is a way of resisting the systems that ultimately and ironically not only oppress those who are on the margins, but oppress those that are the oppressors without even realizing it. And simply put, after 15 years of this focus on justice and now liberation, over the past 2 years, it looks completely different. It's like an awakening that has led us into a new birth. And so if you were here with us in this venue a few weeks ago, there was a diversity and inclusivity team that we introduced. There was a conversation, and these people that have been walking alongside of us within Watershed that are helping us interrogate our mindset, our structures, our systems, and that's beginning to translate into other parts of who we are so that we live more attuned and more awake into the way that systems function, not just within, but also beyond these walls. And so it's impacting the way that we see ourselves helping in the city. It's impacting the way that we understand our staff, our leadership, our facilitators, our greenhouse, our this environment, our student ministries, our small groups, our blocks, our book clubs. It's like there's this blood flow that's beginning to pump into the other parts of who we are from the heartbeat of this idea of liberation. Again, I wanted to name this morning after 15 years because it's so different than it was when we first started. But it's almost as if Watershed in this season of itself is being born again. It's being rejuvenated, resurrected from places that we think, we're actually pretty dead in who we are. It's as though there's this community that's being born again, that's awake, that's struggling and loving together as though a different world is possible today.
Hi, I am Jess Searles.
I'm Kenneth Searles.
This is Kenneth Searles. We were married and have been for, like 13 years? 14 years?
2007.
Years. My sister also lives in the Charlotte area, and we were looking to find a church, and she got, back in the good old days, a postcard in the mail. So we went and visited one Sunday following the postcard in the mail.
I think a common story we hear at Watershed, or a lot of people's experiences, grew up in a church environment that I had sort of put behind me. So church wasn't something I was really interested in, but I was interested in Jess, and so and she was interested in church. So they drugged me along. I really liked it. One of Scott spoke and talked about the ability to sort of think critically and ask questions about faith and relationships with God, and it was a church that I had not experienced before. What's been meaningful for me at Watershed has been the ability to approach my spirituality with a wide open lens, whether it be experiencing God within relationships, within thinking critically and intellectually about how God operates in a real world. It's been meaningful for me to learn that there is a different way to have a relationship with faith, with Christianity, than sort of the old rigid fixed notions that I had experienced in my past.
Through coming to Watershed and joining a block really early on, actually, we formed a really strong friend group, and that's who we continue to do life with. So we're on trips with them. We are helping with adoptions. We're around them if they've experienced a loss in their family or someone who's close to them. There are these moments that aren't like the shiny friendship moments of things, but that we're really in deep with each other. Our lives are intertwined in a whole lot of different levels, which has been really meaningful.
About 10 years ago, Watershed partnered with the city of Charlotte to do what we call Hope Teams, which was partnering with families in Charlotte who were struggling in poverty or other issues like domestic abuse, and trying to sort of wrap arms around those families to provide some sort of assistance and relationship building. And so we did that. We met a family in Charlotte who Jess and I and several other friends from Watershed, and we created a years-long relationship with this family. Got to know that family really well. We ate meals with them. We helped walk them through some of the social service programs they were trying to navigate, tutored them at school. So all the stuff that you do, but in the middle of it, we created so many deep relationships and felt passionate about our connection to this family, and saw how sort of we were changed in the process. And, you know, in a lot of ways, this program, it wasn't perfect. It was really, you know, it was modeled after the white savior complex in many ways. It was tended to be paternalistic. And we became aware of that, but at the same time, we formed these genuine relationships with this family that allowed us to see, you know, how these systems that they were up against made it really difficult. And we had to sort of confront our own privilege in that. So really my connection to God is rooted in my ability to engage in initiatives of social justice. Watershed has given me that opportunity. And we've learned a lot along the way through those relationships we've created, just like Watershed has learned and evolved along the way.
Mine would be through my nephew, who is blind and is Hudson. He is the son of Jen and Matt Wiesner. We knew really early on that he was blind and would, in fact, probably be blind for the remainder of his life. We really looked to Watershed to help support during like, what do we do and how does that play out? And Watershed really came around. Really, my entire family like supported Jen and Matt with meals and service and helping watch her other kiddo, McKenna, while they were dealing with things with HUD, and like then saw what was being done and the ways Watershed was embracing Jen and Matt and HUD and like doing things in greenhouse and catering to like that side of him in a way that like it won my parents over, whether it's on somewhere on the autism spectrum or with a visual impairment or a hearing impairment, really trying to work together and connect to serve students who have special needs. And I feel like that's what Jesus does, right? Like he was serving those that needed help and needed support. And I think, and I'm an educator, so anytime you get to the needs of a kid, and I think Jesus said that too, right? Let the children come to me. And I think they really manifest what they were doing with HUD when he was first born and continue to do with him and other kids in Watershed, and really just providing that additional support and love and connection. You're seeing needs in a community and you're actually responding to them in meaningful ways, which is what needs to be done. And that's what Christ would have done. So I think that's the thing with like, how does it connect us back to like God, and how do we feel close to them? Because you're actually connecting to people in meaningful ways and actually initiating and bringing about change. And when you're thinking about like heaven on earth, like that's what it should be, is these changes happening here, like, and we're bringing that here. So thank you, Watershed.
Thank you, Watershed.
For providing a sense of community and people that we can build relationships with.
Avenues for social justice.
Avenues for social justice. Thank you. We are different because of you. We like to think for the better.
We are better.
As we help one another out. So
Happy 15th.
15th anniversary.
Woo-hoo.
Woohoo! Yay, Watershed.
Thank you, Kenneth and Jess. Over the years, when we have our sort of birthday celebration, our anniversaries, we all gather in this building, and we hug on necks, we shake hands, we maybe have a meal together, we have people that have been a part of this community for a lot of years, maybe play in the band and share, and just the physicality of it is really meaningful. And I have to admit today, it's still incredibly powerful, albeit digital, to hear how God has worked in many of your lives. I've said this since the beginning. The real elixir to this community is you. It's our people. That once a new person gets to know you, gets to meet you, is invited into your home, is invited into your block. They get to serve alongside you in greenhouse, in our kids' space, or in our production booth. They begin to realize that's the magic of this community. It's God using us together. It's God using us in a space that says, all right, what's it mean to come together and to love well, and then to go out into our community and to love well that way as well. So Monday night, we had our first digital preface experience. And we didn't really know how it was going to go. I have to admit, we were a little bit anxious. We had about 20 or so people show up that evening. And many of us are doing Zoom calls, so it's sort of the new norm, and that's something we're all kind of used to, and maybe we're all getting a little bit better at it. But nonetheless, it was a Zoom call, and we didn't know how it would play out, but it played out in a really warm, relational way that people got to meet each other. Some people are brand new to this community. Some have been around for a short period of time. And so it was 20 of us in a space that were being able to be vulnerable and open up and hear from each other and hear a new story about what faith and what Christ and what God and what community begins to look like. And it was like an hour and 15-minute experience, and that's typical for a preface evening. And again, if you're new to Watershed, preface is basically this sort of on-ramp intro to our community. And typically we do it for 6 weeks when we're here present in the space, maybe on a random Tuesday night or Monday night. But in this case, we're doing it digitally for 3 times. And the hour and a half or hour and 15 minutes was over, and we said goodnight to everybody, and people start hitting the red button in the corner of their screen as they're logging out. But it was apparent after 5 or 6 seconds that there were people that were not hitting that red button. They were looking for community. They were looking to connect. And literally, some of them said, well, listen, I got nothing else to do tonight. Can we just be here for a little bit longer? And so we continued to talk and continue to ask questions of each other. And 10 minutes later, we all hung up and kind of went our separate ways. And I've said this again and again and again. It's as much as I think that the music and the teaching and the experience of a Sunday morning is really meaningful here, and I think we do a pretty good job at it, I think what really connects people here and says, I'm really in, is when they get to meet you, when they get to engage you. And it's what I miss so much about what we don't get to do on a kind of week-to-week basis right now due to COVID and all the social distancing and all that. And hopefully in the relative near future, who knows what that looks like, but in the relative near future, we get to engage like we used to. So I decided to ask a good friend of mine, Kevin Snyder, who is in our band, if he wouldn't mind maybe come on over here, Kevin. And if you were watching a few moments ago, Kevin's been doing the music this morning, playing bass, and been doing this for a lot of years. And I would love our folks to hear from you, Kevin. Good morning.
Good morning.
So you've been with us how many years now?
10 years. First off, though, before we begin, what I've learned through all of this is I should have sold everything I have and bought Zoom stock.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Start there, and then we could have funded this church for the next
Yeah, right.
100, 200 years, perhaps.
Yeah, all of us wish we did that. So kind of give us a little intro into who Kevin is and your family and all.
Yeah, so I've been going to Watershed since pretty much this service 10 years ago. I got a flyer, a playlist in the mail.
It's our 5-year anniversary.
On your 5-year
Yeah.
anniversary. Right now, I've been married over 5 years to my wife, Lindsay. We have a 2.5-year-old Logan and another one on the way in November. I stole her from her church, and she decided to make Watershed home.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so 10 years ago was a way different stage of life. What a difference a decade makes.
Yeah. So when you came to us 10 years ago,
Yeah.
what was happening in life for you that made that Watershed such a kind of an important part for you?
Sure. I was on the tail end of finishing up a divorce. It was a short marriage. It was exactly what needed to happen
Yeah.
For both of us. I was estranged from my family, my parents at the time, and God has miraculously reconciled and brought that situation back, and it's incredible, the relationship that we have now. I think 2013 I was able to kind of give that story, and I'm just, I think the Bible verse says every good and perfect gift comes from Watershed.
Well, I think it's
But,
quite
sorry,
that.
God uses Watershed
Yeah, that's right.
in order to do that.
Yeah.
But I literally can look back and I see as clear as day that flyer of playlist that was on the counter that showed up in the mail that day, where I was lonely, I was broken, I was in a city that I didn't really know anybody. I'd been here 2 years, had been working, but hadn't played music for a number of years, hadn't connected to anyone, and was just in a place where I needed something to start out with.
Yeah.
And coming to that first service, for me, I mean, honestly, it was about the music. Do I want to be a part of a church where I can plug in pretty much immediately? And I think within 3 months, I had started playing. Taryn even allowed me to come up on stage and sing Barton Hollow. I was pretty much stiff as a board. You can find that on YouTube if you like.
Yeah.
But it all started with the music and
Yeah.
my friends Jim and Rick, who
Yeah.
invited me into their band, and then getting into the block experience and
Yeah.
meeting some people through that.
So I remember you showing up to Watershed. You kind of jumped into our intro class in the day. I can't remember what we even called it, and got a chance to meet you. And then I remember you being in our home a couple different times and just hearing your story and in the sense that God was up to something profound for you. And we have these small groups and these blocks here, and you jumped into that. Not only did you jump into going to a block, but you jumped into leading one and owning one. Can you talk about like the profundity of how that group has played out for you?
Sure. I mean, nobody feels like they're prepared to lead.
Yeah, right.
But we went through the training course. I met Brian and Dre Miller,
Yeah.
who are now some of my best friends. Brian and I are both Pittsburgh guys, so Steeler fans, and started playing golf together and just really, really connected on a level that was, and it's hard as an adult to actually start to gain friends at age 30.
Right.
But it takes a little bit being vulnerable and being okay to people knowing about you, knowing your story. And it was through beginning the blocks and starting the men's group, of which I think probably 10 of those guys here 8 years later almost are still there in a regular. And we've rotated people through and through. But it's truly an actual brotherhood that we would go to the ends of the earth for each other. And
So
we
how
still
long
see
you been
that
doing
happen.
that? How many?
So I think 2012 is probably
So
when
8
we
years?
officially started. Yeah.
Wow. So 8 years and doing life together and spending time together and struggling together and having great celebrations together. So if I could step back and say, ask this question of you, how do you feel maybe you've been most loved in this space? What comes to mind?
Yeah, it's funny when you asked me that a few weeks ago. The actual story that I'm going to tell right now hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
So I was still wiggling through that because I mean I feel it every time we're together. Like the guys that we meet together, and we've seen tragedy and triumph, and we've all been there to support and to sit and to cry and to hug and to just sit in silence through so much of our lives together. But it was a week after my birthday. My birthday was on a Thursday, and then the next Thursday we had met, and Braden Nicholson came up with the idea at the end of the night. He said, "You know what? Let's do a you-ology, a Y-O-U-ology, because why wait until people are gone to tell you how they feel, right?" I promised myself I would get emotional.
Yeah.
And you know, they went around the group, decade-long friends. And the amount of times that our guys say to each other that, you know, we love you, you know, I love you, like I'm here for you. It's unique in a space, I think, in men's relationships today. And I want to be able to utilize what God has done in our group and spread that, because I think men need that. I think there's a lot of isolation in men's lives, and it's very, very difficult to gain the type of community and friendships that I've been so fortunate to be able to gain and to have. But that specifically had, you know, because it wasn't anything that I asked for.
Yeah.
It was just hearing, you know, 6 or 7 guys go around and say what you mean to them. I mean, it's humbling, and it's something that, even though you think, you know, what is my impact in the world, you don't really necessarily know. But it feels good at the same time. It says, I want to be able to continue to be the type of person that they believe in me as being.
That's good. So Kevin, thank you for just what you and Lindsay and Logan bring to this community. The fourth, I have 2 boys who are 3 years apart. You're not ready for the journey but it's gonna be awesome. Thank you. I'm not surprised they went around the room and told you how they felt about you, because you've invested in them. And that is a snapshot of this community and the kind of the work that you guys, that you as Watershed are and do. And so just thank you for what you do. Thank you, Watershed, for how you value relationships and community, and just so grateful.
My name is Alexis. I live in Gastonia. I've been a part of Watershed for about a year now. I'm a part of Greenhouse. I'm in a Her block, and I've also done Preface. Me and my little sister Olivia visited my dad and Tracy every summer. And then we would always go to church on Sunday at Watershed, and we were raised Presbyterian, so it was always kind of like the weird church we went to with Dad during the summer. Everybody got up on stage and was singing, and it was just very different. We were like, oh, okay, we'll go. We don't want to, but we'll go. And then I know I moved here. He was always asking me, you should come to Watershed. You should get into church. You need to be more involved and strengthen your relationship with God. And I was kind of like, yeah, okay, like normal teenage, early 20s, like, okay, whatever, Dad. But it wasn't until he passed that I felt like I needed something. But originally, it was like I felt like something was missing. Obviously, my dad was missing, but I felt like something else was not complete there. This is where I feel close to him. This was his family. These are people that knew him. And it was, at his memorial there, it was kind of shocking to me how many people from Watershed showed up and had all these stories about my dad, what a great man he was, and how he changed all these people's lives in church. And I was just like, wow, like, this is life changing. This is insane that my dad affected this many people. So that kind of made me want to keep going. And then it was just kind of the sense of family. Everybody was there for me and Tracy, and everybody wanted to make sure we were okay and letting us know how much they were thinking of dad and how much they missed him. And I felt myself getting attached, and I wanted to keep going. So growing up Presbyterian, you kind of learned that if you do something wrong, you have to pray on it and pray God forgives you. And it really separated me from religion, because to me it was just like, well, we can never do right. We can never get into heaven if constantly everything we're doing as human beings is flawed and is wrong. It's not going to happen. Whereas Watershed, it was God is forgiving. God is a loving being. You're not being condemned for it. So it kind of made me want to be closer to God, and didn't make me feel like I was being separated versus good people versus evil people. And it's okay to be in between. We're humans, we're flawed. So it made me want to understand God more and to be closer to God, and actually push myself to be more connected with my relationship. Mary Kay and Ashley Norris, they host our block. They have been absolutely incredible. They were just, my first time there, we all kind of shared our stories. And of course, I talked about my dad, and they were just so loving and willing to listen to everything I had to say. Like, I've always had friends, but never like a group of people that we could sit together and literally cry, because I'm not a crier. I'm not an overly emotional person with people that I don't know, but I just felt really comfortable in the moment. Like, okay, I can emotionally relieve myself around these people and not feel uncomfortable. I feel like women in general are really hard on each other, and to be with a group of women that is totally opposite from that it was beautiful. The anniversary of my dad's passing in June this year was very, very, very hard. And Rick and Carrie from Tracy's block decided to make my dad's favorite foods. And they brought it over and set it up like buffet style, and we sat around the fire pit, and they served us like drinks based on my dad's favorite things, and gave us the food and explained, why they chose this one. And it was mind-blowing to me that these people cared this much about my dad and the extensions of him, that they were willing to take their time out to make this gorgeous spread of food and bring it to Tracy's house and serve it to us. And they spent the whole night with us, and we cried, we laughed, we shared memories about my dad, and it was a truly beautiful experience for me. And I don't think you can find that in any other church. Like, it's not. People give you flowers, give you cards, maybe drop off food and say, I'm sorry, condolences, and they're on their way. But it wasn't like that at all. Like, I've known most of these people since I was probably 12 years old, but it wasn't until getting into adulthood that I felt close to these people. Like, these people are my family. Like, I would do anything for them, and they would do anything for me, and I would not change it for anything. So yeah, those three things definitely are what made me feel loved by God, loved by Watershed as a whole. Watershed, happy anniversary.
So one of the things that we hoped would start to happen this morning is that you wouldn't just hear a story, but that maybe you would find a part of yourself in some of the stories being told. There's a vast spectrum of folks that call Watershed home, and part of what we're trying to do today is to look at these different intersecting points. And the question that maybe would be helpful for you to ask is, how do I see myself represented in the stories that are being told here? One of the things that has been consistently true, one of the things that has never changed in 15 years at Watershed, is the idea of transformation. In the literal name of our community, Watershed, this watershed moment, this division of the direction that I was going and now this different direction, transformation, becoming something new, being someone different 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 15 years from now. That's sort of the non-negotiable. It's what you're invited into. It's what we're invited into. It's what we're hopeful that God would help create in this community. Transformation at Watershed is the ongoing choice to live outside of ourselves in a posture of vulnerability and love towards the other. But this choice to love also then frees us to live within ourselves as well, fully free to be who God had already created us to be. Transformation names the conviction that our being, both individually and collectively, is bound up in our ongoing process of becoming, the journey towards authenticity. And by that, we mean that our identities are not fixed or bound to some sort of arbitrary definition of wholeness or humanity, but instead bound up in God. Whoever interrupts our ego-driven attempts to secure ourselves against one another, be it our family, our co-workers, our neighbors, or the marginalized other. One of the things that I've noticed over the past 15 years is, and Scott named this earlier, but transformation has always seemed to happen within the context of relationship. But I think one of the things that we've also learned through this experience is that our egos really do not want to be dismantled. Like, to become somebody different, it takes a cataclysmic event so that you become awake to see something that you hadn't seen before about yourself or about the world. And so part of what you hear in Alexis's story, and maybe you've heard it in every story thus far, is that there's been some experience with either deep pain, deep love, or some sense of contemplation. And this morning, as we're really beginning the next leg of the trip, right? 15 years have passed. We're putting that in the rearview mirror, and then what's in the future. And so much of what we are invited into is change. And so will you sign up for that, Watershed community? And as we look to the future, Watershed, may we be courageous in the way that we suffer well together. And may we be ambitious in how we love radically and with a deep, profound sense of resolution for one another and for the world.
Hello, my name is Rich Robles, and my wife and I have been in Charlotte for about 12 years. We came here from Chicago. We're both from the Midwest, and we have 4 daughters, ages from 16, and our youngest one, who is 7. We have been married for 24 years, and as I think about my journey at Watershed, it's hard to imagine that I haven't been there for a long time. It's only been like 5 or 6 years. But I have been able to build really strong relationships. My wife has been involved in so many things as well, and our kids. And that has been our journey with Watershed, getting to know people, but also building genuine relationships with people who are following Jesus. My wife and I and our family, we were going through a transition, trying to find a new church. And so I went to the Watershed website, and I found that you had a soccer team. I found the Watershed was involved with Guatemala. Being from Guatemala, that was an instant connection, as well as being involved in the community. And the messages, the sermons were titled very different, nothing that I had seen before. And so I told my wife, let's go check this church out. And we went the first time. And I'll be honest, it didn't feel like home the first time. It was so different, but we were drawn to the genuineness of it and the way that people were so welcoming, and it felt open. And I think that's the main factor that helped us stay in and be curious about what is Watershed about? The other part that was meaningful to us was when we attended Preface. And as you know, Matt asks a lot of questions that just make you scratch your head. and think about your background and where you come from. And so that night I was challenged because he was going around the room asking people, what does it mean to be a Christian? What comes up to you when you hear the word Christian? And I remember one of the participants mentioning that she felt anxiety because when she is around her grandparents, she was not allowed to cuss or drink or say the Lord's name in vain. And I thought, oh, great, here's the pastor now is going to correct her in saying what needs to be done in her life and change. And all Matt said was, okay, thank you. Next. And I thought, what is that? And I began seeing the heart that Watershed had for people, but by modeling what Jesus did. That was the catalyst for me to begin looking at how I was in managing my relationship with God, my relationship with Jesus, more around rules and rituals and customs that I had from coming from different churches. I came to a place where it was less judgment and more about welcoming those who come from different backgrounds. And so as we look today as being inclusive, that began my journey of feeling like I belong in a place. The first time when we walked into leading our first block, and Mark and Ali opened their homes to us. We came from a very conservative background, and they were so welcoming, so open, and I was so intimidated because I didn't know how do I behave around someone who is different from me? How do I behave in this environment that is so open? And there was nothing but love in that home. And I just remember they would buy food for all of us. Sometimes they would have wine. And I remember, Mark and Ali, they decorate their home and, they have these superhero things that they collect, and they would walk us around and show us themselves with so much pride. Here's a couple that could have easily said, oh, these people come from a conservative background. We better hold back. They didn't. They were just themselves the entire time. That changed my life. It really did. Jenny and I talk about it all the time. I owe a lot to them. And to this day, they're amazing. To be loved by them, they're unbelievable. And they taught me a lot about being accepted and being open. And I just thought, well, maybe I can do some of that myself. Can I show myself and show pride in who I am the way they are? And I think that's one of the things that God began changing in me and saying, I made you the way I made you for a reason. I think it's time for you to step into that and walk like that. So Watershed, thank you and happy anniversary.
We've been there since the second Sunday. We would have been there the first Sunday, but there was some prior commitment. But we've been there for the whole 15 years.
And what drew you to Watershed?
Your mother. I'm sitting around the table right now that we were sitting around when we had the discussion that her son was coming to start a church. And I said that I would be there, and I was.
So what has made being a part of Watershed for you, Gene? What's made that experience meaningful?
It's actually, I guess, filled in a part of my life which I didn't really realize needed to be filled in. Ability to make friends and interact with them over these many years. It's hard to understand because I basically don't have very much in a way of religious feelings. But I do feel very strongly about Watershed. I've been to many churches in my life. This is the first one I've ever been to that I actually was ready to get up on Sunday morning and go to church. I've never had that experience before. I've always had to make myself do it before. But now I enjoy it, and it's difficult to say beyond that because there's, I think about it every day about, why do I go when the basic premise of the church doesn't even ring with me, but nevertheless, it has really filled in. And of course, it also has been very rewarding for Pam, my wife, because she has a whole different belief system than I do. So we're able to both get what we want. Because of the relationships and the fact that we get to know one another and whatnot, I've not had to put up with very much, oh, come on, you'll come around, you'll believe, everybody just kind of accepts everybody for the way they are. And that's entirely unique in my experience. It's now been going on for several years, and we have several people who've been in it with us as a result of the acquaintances that we've made there and the friendships we've made there. There's a life outside of Watershed that we share with these people too, and I think that's been very meaningful to me, and I hope to them.
I remember you stood up in the auditorium, the back of the auditorium, maybe a year or two ago during a Q&A on a Sunday morning, and you said something to the idea that your spiritual journey started here at Watershed. Maybe elaborate a little bit more on that. What did you mean by your spiritual journey started here at Watershed?
Because my beliefs are somewhat different than most of the people with whom I associate, I ask questions occasionally. Why is it that you believe differently than I do, and what is it that I'm missing, and that sort of thing. And it always comes down to the same thing. I just cannot accept that this wonderful world that we have was not put together by some intelligent being. And of course, I don't have any trouble with that at all because, right now, Texas is damn near destroyed. The world is suffering from. I don't see it necessarily as a wonderful world. I think we can get some wonders out of it, but I don't think that there's any evidence of any benevolent being. But we can be benevolent to one another, and I think that's where the secret lies. I don't think that we need to reach for some pie in the sky to answer it. I think we could conceivably answer all these things ourselves if we just would. 4 years ago, on my 80th birthday, we had a party. 140 people showed up. Most of them were Watershed connected. And all the entertainment was Watershed connected. And it conceivably was the best 4 hours of my entire life. Now, if that's feeling loved, I felt loved.
Would you wish happy birthday to Watershed for 15 years?
Happy birthday, Watershed.
That's awesome, Gene. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Wow. Gene, man, you're awesome. 35 years old. I was 35. You were
39.
45.
No,
50.
39.
Oh, sorry.
Nice
That's
try.
right.
I felt 45.
Yeah, right, yeah. When we started Watershed.
Yeah.
And if I could go back and tell my 35-year-old self what I now know, it would have been you will not be the one actually helping people as much as they might help you. You actually will probably be a recipient more than you will give at times. And the people that you think that you are going to try and sort of quote unquote convert or fix, they're the ones that are going to probably turn it back on you and maybe fix and invest more. I think of people like Gene.
Yeah.
Right? Like Gene, your life has been profound here and has impacted all of us. And in so many ways we don't see eye to eye, and in so many other ways we probably are closer than we both realize.
More so today than ever.
For sure, for sure. I think early on, and I say this with regret, and I say this with, I'm so grateful we're no longer there, but we were not an affirming community early on. And our LGBTQ community was gracious and patient because they saw that the future was not going to be what the current present was, that we were making a shift. And thank God that we made that full inclusive shift. I think our sisters, our women here, said we've wanted to have a voice here that we can hear from each other, not just men. And there were days I think we thought we were hearing that, but we really weren't. And so, like the graciousness and the patience with which people that we thought somehow we were going to speak into has been speaking into us. I think of our community of color in the last couple of years. I mean, my goodness, to not have their voice here today, what a loss we would be without them. And so, in a very real way, I look back and what we have been recipients of has been people that maybe we thought somehow we were going to speak into them, they spoke into us. And so that's been pretty profound. And if I were to put maybe this morning, 15 years of what we got to experience into one word, I would say it's been meaningful. It's been hard. It's been difficult. There's been immense joy, a lot of tears, babies being born into our reality, and adoptions, and marriages, and new relationships, and new partnerships, and so many new things. It's been amazing, and it's been incredibly meaningful, and the kind of thing that we get to wake up and say we get to be a part of. So if I could ask you, what would be kind of a closing word? What would be your word or your thought?
You know, you haven't lived until you've stood at the door of the church you started for 15 years and heard Gene walk out and say, I really enjoyed this morning. A hell of a sermon. I mean, I only bought like 50% of it, but the other 50%.
Or he'll tell you on the front end before you get up on stage, give him hell.
Yeah. So, like, the way, and it's kind of a metaphor of the ongoing dismantling of myself. And again, I said this earlier, if you had told me this is what you're going to sign up for, first of all, I would have had that deer in the headlight look, but I think gratitude is what's surfacing for me. I'm grateful for the vast number of people that just kept saying yes and have kept saying yes, even though it hasn't been easy. It's never just easy, and it's never just hard. It's never just good. It's never just bad. It's just rolled into this tapestry of all these different. It's a mess. That's how we start. It's a beautiful mess, and so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for every hour, every minute that has been spent by our community, helping us become something different. I'm grateful for every volunteer, for every nose that has been wiped, for every song and story that's been sung or told in Greenhouse, for every overnighter in student ministry, for every block leader that's opened their home and created space, right, for all of this to take place. I'm grateful for every word spoken on this stage, every tear shed, both here and there, the laughter, every note that's been played, every lever that's been slid, every moment that we've, as a community, said we have to be outside of ourselves in this, that if it's only about us, then we might as well shut it down. I'm grateful for our families. I think we would be remiss not to name the experience of being a kid whose dad is the pastor at Watershed, or the spouse of someone who is at Watershed. I'm thankful for our staff, present, past, and future, our lead team, our diversity inclusive. Like, if I'm missing someone, it's not because I'm not grateful. It's just because there's just so many. And so gratitude is my word, and maybe that's a way of starting the next leg of the journey, Watershed. May we as a community continue to be grateful. May we live courageously into the future that we cannot predict. And certainly in today's world, it is less predictable than it's ever been. But in the midst of that, may we practice this scandalous love that you heard being embodied in every story that sort of surges through the life and the relationships that exist here, which means this is you. God has done something crazy and unexpected and wild. And may it continue to breathe life into each other and into this world. And so, Scott, thank you. Happy anniversary. Peace. We love all of you, and have a great week.